Okay, so today is day 25 of Bible in 90 days, or What's in the Bible, where we're reading through the entire Bible. Yes, the entire Bible from Genesis, which is the beginning, all the way to Revelation, which is the end of the Bible. So we're just reading through it, how you would read through a novel, chapter by chapter, page by page, until we get to the end, just to get a feel of what the story of the Bible is. So yesterday, day 24, we ended off with Solomon becoming king, the reign of Solomon, and how he had been commissioned by God to build the temple, and how that was going on, and all the other houses that he built on the side. So we pick up the story from there today. First Kings, we're in First Kings now, chapter 8. The ark, which is the Ark of the Covenant, which used to stay in the tabernacle, with Moses in the wilderness, etc., is now brought into the temple. Solomon dedicates this temple to God, with a series of prayers about sin and sickness and war and oaths, basically saying that if any of these things would happen and the people of Israel or whoever would come and pray in the temple, God would answer. So the temple was a significant thing in the in the history of the Israelites, that whatever would happen there was really basically what God was saying, in the Israelites. We get to hear about the amount of sacrifices that Israel sacrificed. Solomon blesses the people and encourages following God's law. We also hear about the Davidic covenant, which was basically God had made a promise to David that there would always be somebody to reign, over Israel, as long as they were, following his commands, etc. First Kings 9, God appears to Solomon and he tells him that he had heard his prayer. So the prayer that he prayed in First Kings 8, asking God to watch over the temple and heal them and, take away any wars, etc., as long as somebody would come to the temple. God said he heard that prayer and his eyes would be continually on the, on the temple. Then says the only conditions were for them to follow his commands. He also tells them that, what would happen if they didn't. So if they did follow God's commands, everything would be awesome, everything would be, but if they didn't, he then tells them that they would go into captivity, they would go into exile, enemies would come and destroy them, etc. The guy called Hiram, who had helped Solomon with building the temple and the supplies, was not pleased with the land that was given to him by Solomon. We also hear about the labor that was employed by Solomon, which was really the remaining Canaanites in the land that they put into forced labor, to build the temple. We also hear about the amount of gold that Solomon used to import. So Solomon had lots of wealth, a lot of gold was being imported. It actually says that at that time silver was not even regarded as anything because of the amount of gold that was coming into the kingdom. First Kings 10, the wealth and the wisdom and the power of Israel is now known the world over. So there's a queen called Sheba, who comes to visit after hearing all about Solomon, and we hear about her awe at everything and the kingdom of Israel, and all the questions that she had were answered. So she's amazed at the wisdom really that that Solomon has. We also hear again about the amount of gold of other countries and the gifts that were being brought into Solomon. So if you can imagine, the entire world wanted to come and see Solomon, and every time that they came, they were royalty, so they would bring all these gifts, and as a result, Israel became richer and richer because of all the stuff that was coming in, just because people wanted an audience with Solomon. So it also says in there that Solomon excelled all the kings of the world in riches and in wisdom. And unfortunately, or whatever, that's where the story turns. Same as it turned for Saul, same as it turned for David, this is now the turning point for Solomon. So it says here that Solomon had over 1,000 wives and concubines, and he loved them and ended up worshiping their gods. And they had been told specifically, you remember, ever since day one, with Moses, that they should not worship any other gods. They were told in the wilderness that they should not intermarry with the Canaanites or the people where they were going or the people that they had come from, because there would be a snare to them, i.e. they would make them worship other gods. But Solomon seems to have lost sight of this at this point, and he has all these wives, and he actually starts building little temples or sacrifice areas for these other gods. So we hear about God's displeasure with this, and he comes to Solomon and says that he would tear the kingdom away from Solomon. However, for David's sake, he said he would not do it while Solomon was still reigning. He would do it after Solomon was gone, and he would also make sure that Solomon and his family would always have at least one tribe, to rule over. So it also then tells us that because of what Solomon had done in leading Israel into sin, God starts to raise enemies against Israel, preparing for what was coming. Then Jeroboam, who is now the next king who was going to come after Solomon, he would take over the 10 tribes. So there's going to be a split at this point, that the house of Solomon and his sons would continue to reign over Judah, which was the one tribe. Then Jeroboam, the new king, would take over the rest of the tribes, of Israel. But Jeroboam is also given the same deal, that, hey, listen, if you do what David did by following my commands and making sure that the law, is kept in the land, then everything will be good. But if you don't, it'll be the same issue. Solomon, as a result, he figures out that, okay, Jeroboam is going to be king. He tries to kill him, but Jeroboam flees at this point until Solomon was dead. 1 Kings 11, this will also hear about the death of Solomon and the fact that he had reigned for 40 years. So Solomon reigned for 40 years, Saul reigned for 40 years, David reigned for 40 years, Samuel, I think he was also a judge for 40 years. I think Eli as well was 40 years. 1 Kings chapter 12, Rehoboam, which is actually Solomon's son. So there's 2 kings now. And I think at this point you really need to concentrate, if you're reading with us, then the names of the kings, some of them are a bit similar, and it switches from the kings of Judah to the kings of Israel. It's just one thing to keep in mind when you're reading through. So Rehoboam, Solomon's son, he becomes king, and he takes some bad advice that leads to the splitting of Israel. So one section, like I said, was taken by Rehoboam, and another section, which was the rest of the tribes of Israel, were taken over by Jeroboam. So this was preordained by God as a result of Solomon's sin. So when there was a war, they were about a war to try and find out whether they could take over the entire Israel. God stopped that war. Unfortunately, Jeroboam does not go in the way of David by following God's laws, and he makes the people sin. He forsakes God, and he starts his own new religion because he just wanted to hang on to power. 1 Kings chapter 13. Jeroboam, as a result of all the sin and the stuff that he was doing now, he's confronted by a prophet and is told some signs, that would happen. And at the same time, when he tried to seize that prophet or, take him over or whatever else, he actually gets his hand kind of, it withers or whatever else. Then he begs, for his hand to be restored, and his hand is restored. He then obviously invites the prophet over to his house to have some food, but the prophet says no. His specific instructions were to come and say these things and leave. A little while later, the same prophet is deceived by another prophet or another so-called prophet, and he goes to his house and he eats, which was something that he was told not to do. And that same day, this prophet is killed by God. 1 Kings chapter 14, Abijah. So after this, so now it's actually going very quickly between the kings. We're no longer getting the full history or whatever else. We're just seeing, the times in which they reign. So at this time, we get Abijah, who is Jeroboam's son, who falls ill, and they go and inquire of the prophet Ahijah. So Abijah, Jeroboam's son, falls ill, and they go and inquire of Abijah, who was the prophet at this time. We then get to hear about the prophecy about the destruction of Jeroboam's house, because he had not followed in the footsteps of David and did all these other things. And he's also told that there are hard times that were coming to Israel as a result of the sin that they had gone into. Meanwhile, in Judah, so remember again, the narrative kind of splits that, okay, this is what's happening in Israel, i.e. the 10 tribes or the rest of the tribes, and this is what's happening in Judah, in Jeroboam's family and in Solomon's family as it went down. So in Judah, Rehoboam also led Judah themselves into sin, doing all the things that God has said not to do. We hear then that the temple treasures are taken, or they're plundered by the enemies, which is Egypt at this point. We then hear about the constant wars that were between Israel and Judah, then the death of Rehoboam, and Abijah, who was the son of Rehoboam, he then takes over. 1 Kings 15, Abijah, he reigns in sin. He does the same thing that his fathers did. He didn't follow the law, worshipping false gods, etc., and just led the whole country into sin. Then We hear about Asa. Asa, he actually reigns in righteousness and he makes some reforms. He follows in the footsteps of of David. However, later on, Asa is attacked by a king called Baasha, who was the new king of Israel. At this point, but Asa finds some help from another king called Ben Hadad. By paying him using the treasuries of the temple. Then we flip back to Israel. Nadab reigns, and he was also killed, and he also reigned in sin. Then Baasha is killed. Baasha kills Nadab's family and Jeroboam's family. But Baasha, we also hear that he reigned, in sin. So don't get confused too much. I'll explain how you can, kind of navigate through these at the end. 1 Kings 16, which is the last chapter of today. Baasha dies, and his son Elah succeeds him. Elah is also killed by Zimri, who then becomes king. Zimra commits suicide, and Omri then reigns and becomes king. Omri reigned in sin, and he also, he died. Then we hear about a new king called Ahab, who succeeded this guy called Omri. Ahab married Jezebel, and it says here that he did more evil than all the kings before him. So two things to note. Every time when they're talking about these kings, it says, the rest of the acts were recorded in another book. So when we finish First Kings and Second Kings, we're going to get into two other books called First Chronicles and Second Chronicles, which are almost going to be a recap of what we're reading now, but it'll fill in, some details that we don't have at the moment. But yeah, don't worry too much about the names of the kings and what's happening. What we need to know at this point is, as a result of Solomon's sin, the kingdom of Israel, the 12 tribes, it split, right? So Judah, which was one tribe, was now under the house of Solomon and his son, for example, Rehoboam, etc. And they would reign over Judah just because of David's faithfulness. So they were always going to be given something, to rule over because of the covenant. Then we have on this side the other tribes of Israel that were kind of taken over by Jeroboam, right? As a result, again, of Solomon's sin. So they would be going this way. So now we're beginning to say, okay, these are the kings of Judah all the way down to wherever, and these are the kings of Israel all the way down to wherever they went, and this is how they reigned. So it's either they reigned according to the way that David reigned, following God's laws, making reforms, making sure people are following the law, etc., or they would reign in the way of, say, Jeroboam, in his own religion, his own false worship of the idols and things that God, had not said. So just keep that in mind, that Israel splits into two, Judah and the rest of the tribes. We hear the kings of this side and the kings of that side, and that's how it continues, I think, all the way until we finish Chronicles and other things happen in the history of Israel. So yeah, I hope that's helpful, and I will see you guys tomorrow as we continue in the book of First Kings. All right.